On the morning of 17th December 1903, two brothers stood on a windswept beach in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, ready to make history. After a quick coin toss, one of the brothers climbed into a strange wooden craft called the Flyer. The propellers whirred to life, and in just a few moments, the aircraft slowly began moving down a long track laid on the sand. At exactly 10:35 a.m., the Flyer lifted off the ground and flew just a short distance, but it was enough to change the world forever. The brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright, made the first ever controlled flight of a heavier-than-air craft. But how did two unknown bicycle mechanics from Ohio manage to beat the world's brightest minds and make this incredible achievement? Let's find out as we uncover the fascinating story behind the Wright brothers' flight at Kitty Hawk. For centuries, humans have dreamed of flying. As early as prehistoric times, our ancestors looked at birds soaring across the sky and imagined what it would be like to travel like that. But early attempts at flight were often tragic. People tried to build wings out of wood, canvas, and feathers and jumped from tall buildings or towers, hoping to fly. Unfortunately, these attempts almost always ended in failure. The next big idea came from Leonardo da Vinci, who designed a flying machine with flapping wings, inspired by birds. But even though Da Vinci was a genius, he didn't understand some key factors about flight. Humans just aren't built for flapping wings like birds. We're too heavy and our muscles aren't strong enough to provide the power needed for flight. It wasn't until the 18th and 19th centuries that we finally took flight, though in balloons. These early hot air and hydrogen balloons gave humans a taste of the skies, but they could only go up and down and were at the mercy of the wind. They weren't practical for controlled flight. To really conquer the skies, inventors needed to overcome three major challenges. Understanding lift, how to make an aircraft fly. Controlling the plane, how to control its movement up, down, and side to side. Building a strong engine, a lightweight engine that could lift the aircraft and its pilot into the air. By the end of the 19th century, many engineers were working on these problems, but their ideas varied. Some thought it would be a slow, steady process, while others believed brute force was the way forward. While other engineers and inventors had many resources, the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur, were far from the best funded. They were simply two bicycle mechanics from Dayton, Ohio, who were passionate about flight. They didn't have huge teams or large amounts of money, but they had something others didn't: persistence and innovation. They started by learning from others' mistakes and gradually built their knowledge of how to make a plane that could fly. Unlike many inventors at the time, the Wright brothers believed in testing their ideas in the real world. They didn't just sit in a workshop. They built and flew kites, gliders, and small planes to see what worked. The Wright brothers' breakthrough came with their focus on controlling the aircraft. Many inventors could build something that would fly for a short time, but no one could control it in the air. The Wright brothers invented a system of wing warping, twisting the wings, that allowed them to steer the plane. They also built a powerful yet lightweight engine to lift the aircraft off the ground. Their success didn't happen overnight. It took years of testing and failures before they got it right. But in the end, it was their hands-on approach, their ability to learn from mistakes, and their determination that made them succeed where others failed. So, how did these two brothers manage to achieve what so many others couldn't, despite having fewer resources and less knowledge? And how did their invention change the world forever? You won't want to miss the full story of the Wright brothers' journey to Kitty Hawk and how they made their dream of flight a reality. The Wright brothers' flight wasn't just a technical achievement, it marked the beginning of a new era in transportation. They showed that even the most unlikely people can change history with hard work, creativity, and determination. The lessons we can learn from their journey are still relevant today. This is the story of how two bicycle mechanics from Ohio became the fathers of modern aviation and changed the course of history forever. Tune in to see how they did it. Imagine a time when flight was only a dream. In the late 1800s, inventors across the world were trying to solve the mystery of heavier-than-air flight. But it wasn't just about building machines that could fly. It was about understanding the science and overcoming challenges no one had cracked yet. One of the key figures in this race was French engineer Clement Ader, who made bold claims about his own flying machines. But did he really make the breakthroughs he claimed? Let's take a closer look at his story and the lies behind his claims while uncovering the fascinating early history of flight. In October of 1890, Clement Ader built a strange aircraft called Aeolian, powered by a 20-horsepower steam engine that he designed himself. The aircraft was fueled by alcohol and had a wingspan of 16 meters. Ader's machine was ready to take flight. He took it to an estate near Paris for testing with a few assistants by his side. As he piloted the plane, it slowly picked up speed, then suddenly rose off the ground, flying just a few meters at a height of about 8 inches. Although the flight was very short, only around 50 meters, it was enough for Ader to announce he had solved the problem of flight. He was excited, even though the flight barely left the ground. He claimed that only the short field had stopped him from flying farther. He was convinced that he had unlocked the secret to powered flight. But here's where things get tricky. In 1892, Ader received a massive boost when the French Ministry of War funded him with 650,000 francs to create a more advanced aircraft. After 5 years of work, Ader completed the Avian 3, a larger plane with 2 engines, each driving its own propeller. This new plane was a serious step forward, but when he finally attempted a flight in 1897, disaster struck. A gust of wind caught the plane during takeoff, nearly tipping it over. The French army, unimpressed by this failed attempt, cut off Ader's funding. Despite this, Ader never gave up on his belief in aviation and even wrote a book predicting the future of flight. But things didn't stop there. In 1906, Brazilian aviation pioneer Alberto Santos Dumont became famous for flying what is considered Europe's first powered, heavier-than-air flight. But Ader, despite having no real success himself, started to inflate his own achievements. He claimed that Aeolian had flown much farther than it actually had and that Avian 3 had flown nearly 1,000 feet despite no official records to back this up. Ader managed to convince a few of the witnesses to keep quiet about what they had seen, and over time, he managed to rewrite his own history. Today, Ader is still remembered as one of France's early aviation pioneers, even though much of his story was based on exaggeration. In fact, one of Airbus' factories is named after him, showing how far his reputation stretched despite his lack of real success. So, how did a man whose machines barely got off the ground manage to become a key figure in the history of aviation? Was it his bold claims that helped him succeed, or was it his belief in the future of flight that made him unforgettable? Find out how Ader's story mixes invention, failure, and even a bit of dishonesty, and how it all led to his place in aviation history. But Ada wasn't the only inventor obsessed with powered flight. Another fascinating figure was Sir Hiram Maxim, the man who invented the first practical machine gun and forever changed modern warfare. He, too, had big plans for flight and was determined to crack the problem. But his approach was very different from Ada's. Maxim focused on building a powerful engine first, believing that flight would follow after. He even constructed a huge wind tunnel to test the shapes of wings, which later inspired the famous captive flying machine at amusement parks today. But Maxim's story of aviation is one of big ideas, huge experiments, and just like Ada, a bit of controversy. The road to flight was filled with failures, lies, and the persistence of inventors who wouldn't give up. Ada's story reminds us that sometimes history isn't written by those who succeed, but by those who convince others they did. So, did Ada and Maxim truly change aviation, or were they just dreamers in a world that wasn't ready for flight? Stay tuned as we uncover more of these incredible tales of aviation pioneers. The question remains, did Clement Ada really solve the problem of flight, or did he simply convince the world that he had? This video reveals the surprising truth behind Ada's legacy in aviation. Imagine a time when the idea of flying was just a dream. A time when massive flying machines weighed tons and stretched hundreds of feet across. Today, we are diving into the fascinating world of pioneers who risked it all in their quest to conquer the skies. But here's the catch, some believed in brute force, while others saw a smarter way forward. Which path was right? Stick with us to find out. In the late 19th century, the race to achieve powered flight was at full speed. The challenge was enormous, and the stakes were higher than ever. Two of the most ambitious minds of this era were Samuel Pierpont Langley and Hiram Maxim, both striving to build the first flying machine. Langley, backed by the US government, constructed a massive flying machine weighing 4 tons and measuring 60 meters long with a 32-meter wingspan. Powered by two 180 horsepower steam engines, it was designed to roll along a 550-meter metal track. The aim wasn't for the craft to fly freely, but to gather enough speed to take off when the time was right. When it worked, the sight was unbelievable. But despite the initial excitement, it came to a crashing halt when the machine's propellers were damaged by a guardrail. Langley abandoned the project, realizing that steam engines were not the solution for flight. But wait. This was just one piece of the puzzle. While Langley focused on brute force, another genius had a very different idea. What if instead of force, control and stability could be the key? Otto Lilienthal, a German engineer, saw a different future. Could his experiments in gliding change everything? You'll be surprised to learn just how different Lilienthal's approach was and how it set the stage for the flight pioneers we remember today. The key takeaway here, while many believed they could force a machine into the air, others focused on understanding the science of flight first. Lilienthal's gliders didn't have engines, but they gave him insights into stable, controlled flight, something others overlooked. Could this simpler method be the true path to flight? Otto Lilienthal, also known as the Flying Man, approached flight with the belief that the first step was to master control. Rather than trying to build a massive, powerful machine, he focused on the principles of stability and control. He studied birds, ran countless wind tunnel tests, and published his findings, which would help many future pioneers. In 1889, Lilienthal published his book Bird Flight as the basis of aviation, where he laid out detailed tables of lift and drag ratios from his experiments. But Lilienthal didn't just rely on numbers. He knew the true test was flying, so he built and tested several gliders. The first time he flew one, he gained a much deeper understanding of what needed to be done to make heavier-than-air flight possible. By focusing on controlled flight through gliders, Lilienthal paved the way for future aviation pioneers, including the Wright brothers, who would eventually conquer powered flight. His willingness to fail and his persistence in learning from his mistakes made all the difference. The early days of flight were full of experimentation, innovation, and risk. But the path to success was not always about bigger and more powerful machines. Sometimes it's about mastering the small things like control and stability before aiming for the skies. As we look back, it's clear pioneers like Maxim, Langley, and Lilienthal each made invaluable contributions to aviation. But only by combining their ideas did humanity truly begin to understand what it would take to conquer the skies. So, what can we learn from their journey? To fly, we first need to understand why we fall. What does it take to fly? Is it about sheer power, or is there a smarter way to soar through the skies? In this video, we are going to dive into the story of Otto Lilienthal, a man whose early flights shaped the future of aviation. But what happened when his passion led him too far? Stay tuned to find out how his journey ended in a tragic twist and why his work is still relevant today. In the late 1800s, the dream of flying was alive and well, but only a few pioneers truly understood what it took to make it happen. Among them was Otto Lilienthal, a German engineer who believed that the key to flight wasn't just about building massive machines, but understanding how to control and glide in the air. In 1891, Lilienthal started his first experiments by building a glider using wood, bamboo, canvas, and tensioned wire. These weren't just any gliders. Lilienthal stood in a circular cockpit, gripping a support bar, and flew the machines by shifting his body to control the craft's center of gravity. At first, the experiments were simple. He'd start with small jumps from a 1-meter springboard in his own garden, using a sailing apparatus that helped him glide down. As time passed, he got more daring, increasing the height to 2.5 meters, allowing him to glide safely across his garden. By 1893, Lilienthal's designs had become more refined, and he even patented a standard flying apparatus that he sold commercially. This was the first aircraft ever made for mass production. His gliders allowed him to achieve longer flights, even reaching 45 meters off the ground in 1894. Lilienthal didn't just rely on theoretical experiments. He took a hands-on approach, building a hill near his home to test his gliders in updrafts. This helped him achieve flights up to 250 meters. These feats made him famous, drawing crowds of scientists, politicians, and enthusiasts from around the world. People were in awe of his control and bravery. But while many were amazed by his flights, not everyone was impressed. Some of Lilienthal's contemporaries, like Samuel Langley and Hiram Maxim, dismissed his work as impractical. They believed that true flight would come from massive machines, not delicate gliders. So, what made Lilienthal's approach so different, and why did it ultimately lead to tragedy? Keep watching, because there's a surprising twist to his story. Lilienthal's gliders were a game changer. He proved that stable flight was possible, but there was one problem: they were difficult to control. Despite his success, his experiments were far from perfect. In fact, his belief that flight could be achieved with a flapping wing ornithopter, a flying machine inspired by birds, was not just outdated, but dangerous. In 1896, after many successful flights, Lilienthal made one final flight at the Rhino Hills in Germany. The winds were strong and Lilienthal launched himself from a hill, just like many times before. But this time, a sudden gust of wind hit his glider, causing it to crash. Without a proper safety system to cushion the fall, Lilienthal suffered a broken spine. Tragically, he passed away 2 days later. His death marked the end of an era in aviation. While his flights helped prove that controlled, sustained flight was possible, his approach was ultimately too unstable. Lilienthal's tragic accident highlighted a crucial truth. While he made incredible advancements, his work was incomplete. The future of aviation would need a new, integrated approach, one that combined stability, power, and control. This was the moment when aviation research would shift toward a new phase, led by innovators who would eventually succeed where Lilienthal couldn't. Despite his untimely death, Lilienthal's legacy lives on. His hands-on experiments with flight were ahead of his time and laid the foundation for modern aviation. What do you think of when you hear the word aviation pioneer? The Wright brothers, maybe. But there was another man whose work laid the groundwork for modern flight, Octave Chanute. A civil engineer who became obsessed with the idea of flight, Chanute's contributions were crucial in the race for heavier-than-air flight. Stick around to learn how he changed aviation and why his name is often left out of the conversation. Octave Chanute was born in Paris in 1832, but he moved to the United States at the age of 6. Before diving into aviation, he worked as a railroad construction engineer. He was responsible for impressive projects like the Union Stockyards in Chicago and the bridge across the Missouri River in Kansas City. By the time Chanute got involved in the race for flight, he was in his late 50s and running his own engineering firm in Chicago. Interestingly, Chanute wasn't always fascinated by flight. His interest only sparked later in life after reading about birds and the aerodynamics of things like roofs and bridges. Chanute began to study everything he could about flight, creating a huge archive on the latest developments in aeronautics. His growing interest led him to become a key figure in the early development of aviation. In 1891, Chanute's friend Matthias Forney, the editor of the Railroad and Engineering Journal, encouraged him to write a series of articles about flying machines. Chanute eagerly accepted the challenge, attending aeronautics conferences, reading papers, and corresponding with experts in the field. His first article was published in October 1891, followed by 26 more articles. Eventually, these were compiled into a book called Progress in Flying Machines, which became one of the most important books on aviation at the time. It became essential reading for anyone involved in flight research. But did you know that Chanute didn't just talk about flight? He actually helped fund and test real flying machines. He didn't just stay behind a desk. So what happened when Chanute teamed up with young aviation enthusiasts to test his designs? Would his ideas take flight, or would they crash and burn? Keep watching to find out. Chanute may not have flown himself, but his designs and ideas influenced aviation pioneers like the Wright brothers. One of his most innovative contributions was his katydid glider, which was ahead of its time in terms of stability. This glider was based on the idea that the wings should move automatically to keep the plane balanced, a concept that would later inspire many aviation designs. Could his idea have been the key to controlled flight? Let's dive into how it worked. In 1896, Chanute gathered a small team of young engineers, Augustus Herring, William Avery, and William Budafoff, to test gliders on the south shore of Lake Michigan. They brought several experimental gliders, including Herring's glider, which was similar to Otto Lilienthal's design. Unfortunately, it was hard to control, and the machine crashed after only a few flights. Chanute was glad to move on from it. But then there was Chanute's katydid glider, a radical design. Unlike the traditional designs, this one had 6 pairs of wings, each 2 meters long, and hinged to allow the wings to pivot in different directions. This design was a departure from Lilienthal's work, focusing on automatic stability instead of the pilot shifting their weight to maintain control. The idea was that the wings would move to balance the plane, not the pilot. At first, Chanute's team was skeptical about this new glider, but once they tested it, they were surprised. The katydid glider proved to be more stable than the Lilienthal-style gliders, and it flew for a distance of 25 meters. While this wasn't a huge distance, it was a good start, and Chanute was confident that improvements could be made. In August 1896, the team came back to Lake Michigan for another round of testing. This time, William Budafoff brought his own design, a bat-winged glider called the Albatross. Unfortunately, it didn't perform well and was quickly abandoned. But the real breakthrough came with the Chanute Herring glider. This was a biplane, a flying machine with 2 wings stacked on top of each other. The design was more stable, using a rigid structure made from tensioned wires based on bridge construction and a cruciform tail for better stability. This glider was closer to what we'd recognize today as a modern airplane. Its design influenced aircraft construction for many years to come. Although Octave Chanute wasn't able to fly the planes himself, his work was crucial in the development of aviation. His focus on stability and the structural design of his gliders shaped future aircraft designs. His ideas were highly influential, and even the Wright brothers acknowledged how much they learned from him. Chanute's contributions to aviation were groundbreaking, yet he is often overlooked in the history books. His legacy, however, is undeniable, and without his work, the skies may have taken much longer to conquer. Have you ever wondered who first flew a plane powered by an engine? While many people credit the Wright brothers with making the first powered flight, Augustus Herring and Samuel Langley were also key figures in the race to conquer the skies. But did they truly achieve powered flight? Let's dive into their experiments and explore how their work shaped the future of aviation. In 1896, the C.H. Herring glider made a huge leap forward in aviation. After several successful glider flights, Augustus Herring wanted to take it a step further. He dreamed of fitting the glider with an engine and propeller to make it a powered aircraft. But Octave Chanute, the project's leader, believed that they needed more glide tests before adding an engine. Herring, eager to push the limits, went ahead with his own plans. In 1898, he arrived at St. Joseph, Michigan, with a new version of the glider powered by a lightweight compressed air engine. After climbing a tall dune, he turned on the engine, and the glider took off. A reporter from the Chicago Record described the flight. The glider flew for 50 to 60 feet, but the speed dropped, and the glider gently landed on the sand. Herring continued testing, and a week later, he managed to fly for 22 meters in 10 seconds. Despite Herring's claims that he made the first powered flight, there is no clear evidence to prove it. The glider only flew down a slope, and it's unclear if it ever flew under its own power. While Herring's powered flights were a key moment in aviation history, it was clear that many pieces of the aviation puzzle were still missing. That's when Samuel Langley entered the scene. Langley was a brilliant scientist and a key figure in the race for powered flight, but his approach to flying machines was very different from Herring's and Chanut's. What made Langley's work so controversial, and why did it end in failure despite his resources? Keep watching to find out. Samuel Langley was born in 1834 and started his career in astronomy before moving into aviation. By 1891, Langley was heading the Smithsonian Institution, where he had access to enormous resources for his flight experiments. Unlike Chanute and Herring, Langley believed the key to flight was creating a powerful engine, not testing gliders first. In 1891, Langley began building a large, unmanned flying machine called the aerodrome. The aerodrome was a steam-powered craft with 2 sets of wings and a small cruciform tail for stability. It was launched from a special steam-powered catapult on a boat anchored in the Potomac River. Despite his best efforts, Langley's aerodrome repeatedly failed. The first version, Aerodrome 0, crashed again and again during testing, its structure breaking and its engine cutting out at random. Langley didn't give up though. He kept building better versions of the aerodrome, hoping one day it would fly. Langley's belief that powerful engines were the key to flight led him to build increasingly sophisticated machines, but his focus on the engine meant he overlooked the importance of glider testing and control. Langley never tested his craft as a glider before trying to power it, a crucial step that the Wright brothers would later perfect. While Herring and Chanute made significant progress with their gliders, it was clear that a successful powered flight required more than just a good engine. Directional control, stability, and lift had to come together in the right way. Langley's story is one of brilliant ideas, but poor execution. Despite his failure, his work was influential and contributed to the development of flight. In fact, his later work would inspire the Wright brothers, who would eventually achieve the first sustained, controlled, powered flight in 1903. So, while Augustus Herring and Samuel Langley didn't achieve the first powered flight, their work paved the way for the breakthroughs that came later. Chanute's gliders, Herring's experiments with power, and Langley's engine development all added pieces to the puzzle of human flight. It was only a matter of time before someone put it all together, and that person was the Wright brothers. Despite all the early struggles, the dream of flight was getting closer. These early pioneers may not have flown the first powered plane, but their contributions were vital to the success of those who did. What does it take to get a plane off the ground? Is it just about having a powerful engine, or is there more to it? Samuel Langley made incredible progress with his aerodrome craft, while others like the Wright brothers were working on their own dream of flight. But could Langley's work have led to the first powered flight? And how did the Wright brothers step in to change everything? Stick around to see how the race for powered, controlled flight unfolded. After failing with several early attempts, Samuel Langley finally made a huge leap forward. On 6 May 1896, at 3:05 p.m., Aerodrome number 5 took off from the catapult. The flight was a major achievement, and it was witnessed by Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, who was also a pioneer in aviation. Bell described the flight as incredible. He said the model rose steadily into the wind and swinging in large curves, it continued to ascend until its steam was exhausted. After about 1 minute and 30 seconds, the craft landed gently on the water. The flight covered more than a kilometer, which was a huge milestone at the time. Langley repeated the experiment that afternoon and got similar results. For the first time in history, a heavier-than-air craft flew steadily and under its own power for a sustained distance. It was a moment many people believed would lead to the first true powered flight. But there was one big problem. The aerodrome was unmanned and lacked any control system. This meant it couldn't steer or fly in a controlled way. Langley had come so close but had not yet fully solved the puzzle. Langley was initially content to stop his work there. However, after public pressure, he finally agreed to build a full-size, manned version of the aerodrome. In fact, the US government became interested in his work. President William McKinley authorized $50,000 from the War Department to fund Langley's project, believing that a flying machine might be useful in the Spanish-American War. But Langley's race to success wouldn't go unchallenged for long. A new pair of challengers were rising, and they were about to change the game in a way no one expected. Enter the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers, Wilbur and Orville Wright, were born in Dayton, Ohio. They were the third and fourth of 5 children in the Wright family. Their father, Milton Wright, encouraged them to be inventive, and Susan Wright, their mother, was incredibly resourceful, able to fix or build almost anything. The Wright brothers grew up creating all kinds of machines and gadgets. They even made improvements to hay balers and created a paper folder. Their first serious interest in aviation started in 1878 when their father gave them a small helicopter toy made of paper and bamboo. The toy flew across the room, and the brothers were fascinated. They spent days trying to figure out how it worked, and this marked the beginning of their lifelong obsession with flight. But aviation was just one of many childhood interests. Both brothers had other passions and jobs. Orville started his own print shop, while Wilbur studied trigonometry and Greek. However, a freak accident in 1889 changed everything for Wilbur, making him focus all his energy on flight. Unlike Langley, the Wright brothers took a hands-on approach from the beginning. They didn't just build a plane, they carefully studied and tested gliders to understand the principles of aerodynamics, lift, and control. They were also the first to realize that a stable, controllable design was just as important as a powerful engine. In 1903, after years of research, the Wright brothers successfully made the first sustained, controlled, powered flight. They put everything they learned into a machine that could fly under its own power, turn, and land safely. Their invention was the first to truly achieve what Langley and others had been trying for, the first real airplane. While Langley's aerodrome was a huge step toward flight, the Wright brothers were the ones who truly cracked the code. They combined glider testing, engine design, and control systems to create a machine that could sustain flight. Langley's work helped pave the way, but the Wright brothers were the ones who made it a reality. Have you ever wondered how two brothers, who started out selling bicycles, ended up changing the world of flight? This is the incredible story of how the Wright brothers turned a simple idea into the first powered flight, and how a twist of fate helped them solve the biggest problem in aviation history. At the start, things weren't always so bright for the Wright brothers. In fact, Wilbur's health took a major hit after a terrible accident with a hockey stick. This forced him to spend a lot of time alone, reading about all sorts of things. But even after everything that happened, the Wright brothers never gave up. They kept pushing forward, and in 1892, they stumbled upon something that would change their lives forever: the bicycle. In the late 1800s, a new type of bike called the safety bicycle became a big hit. Unlike the older, dangerous high-wheeled bikes, these were easier to ride and soon everyone wanted one. Seeing a great business opportunity, Orville and Wilbur opened a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio. They not only sold bikes but also fixed them. Business was so good that by 1896, they started making their own brand of bicycles. But just as things were going great, they learned some tragic news. Otto Lilienthal, a famous German pilot who had been experimenting with flying machines, had died in a crash. This moment sparked an obsession with flight in the Wright brothers. They realized they could do what no one else had done: build a flying machine that was controlled, safe, and practical. They read everything they could find about aviation, and here's the shocking part: they discovered that most of the past flying experiments had missed one key point. It wasn't enough to just get a plane off the ground. The real challenge was controlling it. And that's when they figured out something no one else had. They didn't need to make a plane stable by brute force. Instead, they needed to make it maneuverable and controllable just like birds. But there was one huge problem. How could they make the wings of their gliders twist to control the plane's movement in the air? In 1899, while working in their bicycle shop, a customer came in to buy an inner tube. As Wilbur played around with the cardboard box, twisting it back and forth, an idea suddenly hit him. What if they built a biplane, two wings stacked on top of each other, where the tips of the wings could twist? This would let them control the plane in a way no one had ever done before. This breakthrough, called wing warping, was the key to making the first fully controllable aircraft. The brothers used their skills from building bicycles, like understanding how to balance and steer, and applied them to the world of flight. It was a simple idea, but it changed everything. Stay tuned, because in the next part of the story, we'll reveal how this simple idea led to the first successful flight in history and how the Wright brothers made aviation a reality. You won't believe what happens next. This idea from a cardboard box helped them become the fathers of modern flight. What if I told you that two brothers, who started out building bicycles, were the first to conquer the skies? Their journey from making bikes to flying machines was full of challenges, breakthroughs, and surprising moments. Stay tuned to find out how they made history with the world's first manned flight. In the late 1800s, Wilbur and Orville Wright had a dream that would change the world. They didn't just want to fly, they wanted to control flight, just like birds. After countless trials and experiments, they figured out a way to make this dream a reality. And it all started with a simple kite. Let's dive into how the Wright brothers' amazing journey began. The Wright brothers' story really takes off when they decided to test their ideas with a small kite. Within days, they built it, and it worked better than they had hoped. The kite was equipped with a special mechanism to twist the wings and control the flight, something that no one else had done before. Wilbur tested the kite in a field outside Dayton, and when it flew perfectly, he rushed back to share the good news with Orville. But they weren't done yet. With this success, the brothers turned their attention to building a full-size glider that could carry a man. However, there was a problem: they needed the perfect place to test it. A few months earlier, Wilbur had asked the United States Weather Bureau for advice on the best place to test their glider. They got a reply from Joseph J. Josa, a weather station manager who recommended a remote beach near Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. It was the perfect spot: wide, flat, and consistently windy. By 1900, the Wright brothers had built their first full-size glider. It had wings like the ones in Otto Lilienthal's research, a horizontal tail for stability, and a system to control the wings. But their next challenge was even greater: the weather. Would the wind be strong enough? Would the glider even work? Wilbur went to North Carolina first to set up camp. When he arrived, he found that Kitty Hawk was a tough, windy place with very little shelter. But he didn't give up. He set up a camp and began assembling the glider. Soon after, Orville joined him, and together they got to work. The winds were so strong that they first tested the glider as a kite. They made adjustments, trying different weights, and even changing the glider's tail to see how it affected the flight. It worked. The glider was surprisingly responsive. But there was a setback. On 10th October, a gust of wind slammed the glider into a stand, smashing it to pieces. But the Wright brothers weren't ready to give up. They quickly started repairing the glider, and by 13th October, they were testing it again. They carried the glider to a place called Kill Devil Hills, where the sand dunes were perfect for glider flights. With help from the postmaster, Bill Tate, they launched the glider off the dunes, and the results were incredible. The glider was so responsive that they were able to control every movement, flying it distances of up to 120 meters. It was clear that they were on the right track. After weeks of successful tests, the brothers packed up and returned to Dayton. But something wasn't right. The glider didn't fly as well as they had expected based on Otto Lilienthal's research. They suspected that Lilienthal's calculations might be wrong, and this made them more determined to continue their work. Back in Dayton, the brothers immediately started planning a new and better glider. They made the wings bigger, the shape more curved, and even tested new materials. They knew they were getting closer. But there was still one big question: would their next attempt finally solve the problem of controlled flight? The answer was coming, but they would have to face even more challenges before they could conquer the skies. Want to know what happens next? Stay tuned for the next part of the Wright brothers' story, where they go back to Kitty Hawk with a new and improved glider, ready to take on the skies once again. You won't believe what they achieved next, and how a simple change helped them make the first powered flight in history. Imagine being on the verge of making history, but facing setback after setback. That's exactly what the Wright brothers experienced in 1902, and despite everything, they were determined to solve the mysteries of flight. In today's video, we are going to explore how they finally overcame challenges, designed a groundbreaking new glider, and took a giant leap toward conquering the skies. By 27th July 1902, after months of trial and error, the Wright brothers' new glider was ready for testing. They had dealt with issues like center of gravity problems, and even though the glider was the largest and heaviest of its kind, it still managed to fly smoothly. But just like their earlier models, this one had its own set of challenges. Despite being larger, this new glider flew just as responsive as their earlier models, and soon they were making 100-meter flights with it. However, the lift generated by the glider was far less than they expected, and it was dangerously unstable. The glider had a tendency to pitch up or down suddenly. This could have led to serious crashes if the Wright brothers hadn't reacted quickly enough. On several occasions, Orville narrowly avoided a bone-crunching crash thanks to his fast reflexes. Another unexpected issue arose when they tried to bank the glider. Sometimes it would snap into a violent spin, something that pilots today would call a spin. This happened during one flight when the glider slammed into the dunes and Orville was thrown headfirst into the elevator. Thankfully, he wasn't seriously hurt. But this was a wake-up call, so the brothers made the decision to keep the elevator mounted at the front of the glider, a design known as a canard configuration, to prevent future crashes. Then, just when they thought things couldn't get more complicated, the Wright brothers received some surprising news. They were joined by Octave Chanute, a well-known aeronautical engineer, who brought with him two talented assistants, Edward Hoffa and George Spratt. They also learned that Samuel Langley, a rival in the race for flight, had almost spent all of his funding, yet his full-scale aircraft was still nowhere near ready to fly. This left the Wright brothers at a serious advantage despite their limited resources. They were not only surviving but pushing ahead faster than their competitors. So, how did they do it? The Wright brothers, realizing that the lift tables they had been relying on were wrong, decided to create their own data. They built a simple lift balance using a bicycle wheel, and after many tests, they discovered that the lift predictions they were using weren't accurate at all. They didn't stop there. Using a small wind machine powered by a 1-horsepower motor, they built a delicate lift balance and tested 48 different airfoil sections. What they learned from all these tests was invaluable. They had created lift tables that were 100 times more accurate than anyone else's data. With this new knowledge, they went back to the drawing board, designing a new glider with a longer, narrower wing and a shallower camber. They added a system for better wing control and a fixed vertical tail to solve the side slip problem. Their glider was now ready for testing again in Kitty Hawk. But not everything went according to plan. After a few successful flights, Orville was piloting the glider on 23 September when disaster struck again. The glider suddenly pitched up, stalled, and crashed to the ground. While Orville was unharmed, it was clear that their efforts to fix the side slip problem hadn't worked completely. Despite all these setbacks, the Wright brothers weren't ready to give up. They knew they were close, very close to achieving controlled, sustained flight. But how did they solve this last issue? You'll have to stay tuned for the next video to find out what happened next and how they finally made history in 1903. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next part of this incredible journey into the history of aviation. And hit that bell icon to get notified the moment we upload the next chapter in the Wright brothers' quest to conquer the skies. Did you know that the Wright brothers' first successful flight wasn't just a fluke? It was the result of years of experimentation, overcoming mistakes, and improving designs that no one else could match. But they weren't alone in the race for flight. Others were trying too, but with disappointing results. Today, we'll dive into how the Wright brothers achieved what no one had before and how their rivals, despite their efforts, could never quite catch up. In the early days of flight, the Wright brothers faced many challenges, especially when it came to controlling their glider. Most gliders back then had problems with stability and would often end up in uncontrolled side slips. After some careful research and trial and error, the Wright brothers figured out that their fixed tail was actually making the glider more unstable. So, they came up with a brilliant idea, making the vertical rudders movable. This allowed pilots to control the unwanted yaw, side-to-side motion, something that no other gliders at the time could do. But there was a concern. How would the pilot manage both the rudder and the wings at the same time? To solve this, the Wright brothers linked the rudder to the wing warping cables, allowing the pilot to control both with a single set of controls. This was a game-changer. Now, pilots could control all three axes of flight, pitch, roll, and yaw with just one simple control system. The glider was now a joy to fly. This was a crucial step toward perfecting the flight control system. It helped the Wright brothers make hundreds of successful flights, reaching distances of up to 190 meters. Meanwhile, others like Octave Chanute and his team were testing their designs, but they were getting nowhere. This clearly showed that the Wright brothers were on the right track. But this was just the beginning. The Wright brothers knew they had a lot more work ahead. Powered flight was the next big challenge. At the same time, the world was watching, and others were eager to catch up. But not everyone was successful. Some, like French inventor Ferdinand Ferber, tried to copy the Wright brothers' glider, but without the proper design, it failed miserably. Even more shocking was the claim by a German immigrant, Gustav Whitehead, who said he had flown his aircraft as early as 1901, years before the Wright brothers. But there was no proof, and it was later confirmed that his machine could never have flown. So, what did the Wright brothers have that everyone else didn't? It all came down to the Wright brothers' secret formula, a unique combination of wing design, control systems, and precision engineering. While other inventors were trying to brute force their way into flight with poor designs, the Wright brothers were methodically improving their technology. But that wasn't the end of the race. A major rival, Samuel Langley, had plenty of funding and resources to build a successful aircraft. However, despite his wealth and connections, Langley's attempt to create a flying machine was riddled with setbacks. His engines were underpowered, and the aircraft's design was problematic. Langley even turned to his machinists to help, but it wasn't until 1903 that he finally finished a working model. But was it too late? Langley's team was about to make their first test flight. The date was set, but what happened next shocked everyone and showed just how close the race really was. But was Langley's aircraft ready for flight? Or would the Wright brothers' years of hard work and secrecy give them the edge? Stay tuned as we dive into the moment that changed history and see how the Wright brothers' battle for powered flight finally came to an end. Imagine working on something for years, facing countless setbacks, and finally being ready to test your dream. That's exactly where the Wright brothers were in 1903. But just as they were about to make history, another major player in aviation, Samuel Langley, was having his own problems with a big test flight. So, what happened when the Wright brothers finally launched their plane? Let's dive into the incredible journey that led them to achieve powered flight. By 7th October 1903, everything seemed ready. Charles Munley, who had worked with Langley, climbed into the aerodrome's cockpit, ready to test the aircraft. He had even attached a compass to his trouser leg, hoping to navigate better in the air. With the engines running at full power, the catapult was triggered. The aerodrome shot forward and lifted off, but only for a moment. It got caught on the catapult and crashed into the sand. Despite the failure, Munley remained optimistic, saying, "My confidence in the future success of the work is unchanged." Meanwhile, the Wright brothers were facing their own set of challenges. They needed a lightweight and powerful engine for their plane, and after searching, they realized that no automobile manufacturer could design the engine they needed. So, they took matters into their own hands. Working with their mechanic, Charles Taylor, The Wrights built a compact four-cylinder engine that weighed only 140 pounds and produced 12 horsepower. This engine was a huge step forward, featuring one of the first aluminum engine blocks and a direct fuel injection system. Another challenge the Wright brothers faced was designing the propellers. Most other aviation pioneers were using propellers designed for boats, but the Wright brothers quickly realized that the physics of air and water were very different. They couldn't rely on trial and error like others. So, the Wright brothers used their knowledge of aerodynamics and created the first propellers designed specifically for flight, based on solid scientific principles. Despite all of these innovations, there was still one huge problem left. The Wright brothers needed to get their plane into the air. They built a special dolly to help launch the aircraft from the sand of Kitty Hawk Beach, but they had to wait until the plane was fully assembled. However, when they arrived in September, their campsite was destroyed by storms. It was a disaster, but the Wright brothers were not discouraged. They quickly rebuilt their hangar and got back to work. By 8 October, the parts of the flyer arrived, along with news of Langale's failed test flight. Wilbur Wright wrote to Octave Chanute, saying, "It seems to be our turn to throw now, and I wonder what our luck will be." The Wrights knew that Langale would likely try again soon, so they decided to skip testing the plane as a glider and immediately installed the engine. But their progress was halted once again. A fierce storm hit, threatening to tear apart their hangar and roof. For days, they worked tirelessly, reinforcing the structure. It wasn't until early November that they finally finished assembling the aircraft, and they were ready to take the next big step toward their dream of powered flight. This was the turning point. While Langale had all the resources and support, his aircraft had failed. The Wright brothers, on the other hand, had nothing but determination, a small workshop, and their groundbreaking ideas. They knew their plane was ready, but the next challenge would be the most important one: getting it into the air and proving that powered, controlled flight was possible. Now, with their plane ready and the world watching, what would happen next? Could the Wright brothers succeed where Langale had failed? Or would their years of work be for nothing? Stay tuned to find out how the Wright brothers' quest for powered flight reached its thrilling conclusion. You won't want to miss what happens next in this incredible race to the skies. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next part of the story, where we reveal whether the Wright brothers' hard work finally paid off and how they made history on that fateful day in December 1903.